Jedi Trial is another fairly early piece of Clone Wars tie-ins, dropping in October of 2004 and being written by David Sherman and Dan Craig, a duo who only worked on these novels for the Star Wars universe, which is pretty rare in all honesty, many of these authors working on a few projects. It is likely this duo was picked due to their collaboration on the Starfist series of novels, a series taking place in the 25th century following Marines fighting wars in space. This book tracks pretty well with the duo, both having worked in the military, David in the Marines and Dan in the Army, the military procedural sci-fi style being largely the angle of this particular Star Wars novel. We don't really have much on why this novel was greenlit or who pitched it, which is fairly standard for Star Wars novels, though if I had to guess, the Starfist series is probably what got them the Star Wars gig. This book has a continuity issue, initially taking place 2.5 years after Geonosis in 20 BBY, that would later be revised in timelines to 22 BBY, the reason being that the extended universe timeline, there are numerous examples of Anakin being knighted mere weeks after the Battle of Geonosis and not a couple years. This isn't a huge issue, honestly, with the story, but some stuff in the text is incorrect with its final placement in the timeline. The story follows Anakin Skywalker in 22 BBY, who's on a solo mission since Obi-Wan Kenobi is off on his own solo mission. Anakin is accompanied by Master Nija Helkrin, a disgraced Jedi Master on Prestelin after an invasion of the planet by the Separatist army led by Pors Tonith, a ruthless Mun general. Meanwhile, we also get the view of some non-Clone Republic combatants like Odi Subu, who was in recon and in the Prestilian Defense Force, as her romance grows with Urk Harmon, who is part of the Prestilian Defense Force as well, though as a pilot. Soon the battles commence, with the war seeing massive casualties to the Republic as Anakin grows closer to Master Helkrin. Eventually, the two Jedi also learn they both have secret wives, and though it's forbidden, they confide that it's something that really defines them as warriors and Jedi, despite also somewhat conceding that Yoda and the Council's celibate philosophy also works. Tonith, the Mun general, eventually takes some hostages, including Rinja Momen, a woman who is a communications chief, which leads the Jedi to feint a frontal assault on the base as Anakin sneaks in to save her and the other hostages. Momen and Anakin grow a rapport, with Momen reminding Anakin of his late mother Shmi, though when Momen dies, Anakin is almost driven to the dark side due to his grief and anger, considering killing Tunith and his other sentient men. This is when the voice of Qui-Gon mysteriously contacts Anakin, pulling him back from the edge. Azash Ventress, however, who is supervising the operation, isn't done yet and sends in a Trade Federation battleship, which Anakin is seemingly killed, disabling. Following this, the day is saved and Anakin is hailed a hero, with the Jedi Council deciding that Anakin is finally ready to become a Jedi Knight. Anakin is the lead of this novel, and Obi-Wan is off adventuring as Anakin is on the verge of graduating from a Padawan to a Jedi Knight when he meets Nija Helkrin, a disgraced Jedi who Anakin starts sparring with while waiting on his master to return, eventually creating a bond and kinship with the Jedi Master. Soon, Nija, despite being shunned a bit by the Order, is sent on a mission to Prestilian and invites Anakin to back him up on the quest since they grew something of a friendship. Anakin has to step up and step back a bit from his reckless attitude and take over some of the semantics of war. Eventually, he bonds with Nija, as they both have secret families behind the backs of the Jedi Council. Nija Helkrin is a pretty neat character that helps further the extended universe continuity. He's the grandfather of Corellian Jedi Corran Horn, who becomes a major Jedi during the New Republic era, as well as a member of Rogue Squadron. You see, one thing that's interesting about Legends that was mostly downplayed in canon was the Jedi sub-factions, such as the larger Jedi Order, Corellian Jedi, Rogue Jedi, Dark Jedi, and they're not necessarily Sith either. Corellian Jedi mostly stuck to Corellia, not really following the wider order and making their own calls separate from the other Jedi, though later on it was half retconned that they fought with other Jedi during the Clone Wars, hence Nija working with Anakin here. Corran is probably my favorite Jedi that originated in novels, so seeing more of him brought to the lore through his grandfather is kind of awesome to me. In the book, Nija is chastised for losing a rogue Jedi and stripped of command, with his mission to Pristilian being his pseudo-second chance. I think the background that he was sort of a guest to the wider Jedi Order also makes his outcasting a bit heavier hitting, and perhaps shows a level of elitism that you don't always see in the Jedi Order. The reveal that he has a family is a great way to connect him to Anakin, and also establish the family line he had, and eventually Corran Horn. I think it's fitting that in a prequel novel you also have this pseudo-prequel to Corran's journey, and with him being so important to the Star Wars novels during the Jedi Academy, New Jedi Order, and X-Wing series, I think it was a good play. I don't love Nija the way I love Corran, but he's pretty okay in this novel. We'll talk more about Corran in our next Star Wars novel video, so stay tuned for that. Pors Tunith was a Munalist admiral for the Separatist armies, and ran the counter-campaign to Anakin and Nija, with Tonith taking hostages he would kill and running carefully planned operations. I think he works well as a villain for a book like this. He's kind of like Thrawn, where he thinks of these convoluted plans, then has convoluted backup plans to those plans, and the most convoluted backup plans yet to back up those plans. Yet the book plays it like it's perfectly normal, and you really buy it, and it's just a character that I don't think would be nearly as exciting on screen as he is on the page. Odie is a reconnaissance officer for the Republic that gets in a romance with hotshot pilot Irk, the duo who are largely more down-to-earth POVs for the audience during the carnage of the Clone Wars, with Eric seriously injured during the battles that took place in this book, and it's all pretty good. Tonally, this book is a semantic war book. Occasionally there are pages of Anakin considering things like feeding his army, ship placements, tank placements, attack plans, transportation logistics, and other scenes that viciously describe people dying horrible deaths. All behind a villain, Pors Tunith, who proves to play war like a chess game rather than a situation in which people are actively being killed en masse. As a result, it gets kinda dark, but also it's a bit sterile about that darkness. The Bane books, for example, are violent, but we learn what people are thinking as they kill or as they die. There's often a level of explained motivation even. In this book, it describes scenes of the clones pushing an unsuccessful advance up a hill and being torn to pieces. If you recall, months ago I talked about the Mace Windu Shadowpoint novel, also taking place in this period and dropping during this era, and I find it interesting that that book was very dark and violent too. My theory is, as always with media of the early 2000s that's darker, 9/11, so America media hitting a bit of that cold and edgy phase, which is why you see such dark, tragic media so much of the time during that time period. Smaller side characters like Grudo join the battle with the group, only to be killed by friendly fire on accident, with the book shrugging it off as, oh well, that's war and it's something that happens. It's very interesting to make a visceral war novel like this set in the Star Wars universe. I like that this book has cool, meticulous, and well-described battles, though it is a bit much for me at times. It talks about intestines being shredded, blown off limbs, blood, and more. It's really supposed to show how the Clone Wars would be if it was a real war, rather than giving a nice fantasy gloss that we would see in the movies or many of the TV shows like the Clone Wars. Not that those aren't violent, but they are rarely very realistic. This book goes from how can we feed 2,000 troops on the southern front to troops being blown to bits in seconds flat. The novel's objective isn't really character development, though there is a touch of that. Of course, Anakin is knighted and finds someone to talk to in regards to being a married Jedi, which we all know is strictly forbidden and very rare. I also like that as Anakin gets in the weeds, he realizes that clones have feelings and hopes and are people just like any other sentient in the galaxy, which makes him move away from his views of clones as numbers alone. Overall, I think this book is really good if you're interested in a grounded Star Wars tale, but keep in mind lots of the fantasy and romance of the main story isn't here. This is very much a war novel through and through, and in that regards, it is an interesting experiment to make within the Star Wars universe. It isn't personally my thing. I'm very much a character guy, and I can like a semantic book, but I don't know. This didn't connect with me all the way. I don't know. I just wasn't sold. This wasn't totally my thing, even if I found it to be a somewhat interesting experiment within the Star Wars universe.